Hello, everybody. Miss Peachy again from WCA Biology. Today we are looking at Unit 8, Lesson 6. Genetic variations can be inherited. Duh, right? Now, we've been talking about this all along, right? And so you'll see some of the stuff that we've talked about. Of course, some new information as well. And we'll kind of also see, how we can determine what those genetic variations actually are in your bodies. So our key words here are inheritable genetic variations, meiosis, mutations, somatic cells, variants, and genotypes. And so we have three kind of new vocab terms here. All right, so inheritable genetic variations. Now it's talking to you about how even though you have mutations and they can occur in all your cells, not all of them are inheritable. And I know I've been talking about this to you all along. So only those that are found in your sex cells, in your egg cells and your sperm cells are those that can be inherited. I know, again, that's what I've been saying, right? And so these are called gametes, your egg cells and your sperm cells. They are haploid, meaning they have half the number of chromosomes. You inherit one haploid cell from your mother, one haploid cell from your father, and when they fuse together during fertilization, they form a single cell called a zygote, which is diploid. And that diploid zygote will go through mitosis at that point, make copies of itself, start to differentiate into different types of cells, and eventually form a whole new organism, each one with a combination of different alleles and genes, right? The rest of your cells in your body are known as somatic cells, and somatic cells are just the regular old body cells. These are not eggs and sperm. They contain a diploid set of chromosomes. Skin cells, for example, are somatic cells and are the cells that form your muscles and everything else in your body except the eggs and sperm. Even though they can have mutations that affect them, you can't pass those on to your offspring. You cannot pass on a cancerous mole to your offspring, right? It's only those mutations that affect your egg and sperm that are inheritable. I feel like pretty proud because I've been saying this all along, people. All right, so the other thing that kind of is mentioned in this lesson is how, even though there's such a diversity in the human population, we share 99.9% of our DNA is exactly the same as every other person in the world. Isn't that crazy? 99.9%. However, it's that 0.1% of variation that makes us so different from each other. And it's that 0.1% is, there's a lot of genes. So that's kind of a lot anyways, right? So how do we even measure this? How do we measure 0.1%? We'll talk about that in just a moment. But first of all, they're going to talk a little bit about a specific mutation that is inheritable. See, why you can't inherit skin cancer from some of your parents. There are genes that make you more at risk for cancer that are inheritable. And that means that you can inherit a predisposition for developing certain kinds of cancer, even though you can't inherit the cancer itself, if that makes sense. So, for example, we have a gene called the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes. There's two genes, and everybody has those genes. And these genes themselves, they don't cause cancer. But they are linked to repairing broken DNA. So your DNA, it breaks and it needs to be fixed so that it doesn't start replicating uncontrollably because uncontrolled cell division is cancer. And so that leads to tumors, and that's what cancer actually is. So you have these two genes that actually help to repair the DNA. As we get older, those genes don't function as well. And so the DNA isn't fixed as well as it was when you're younger. So as you age, you automatically increase your risk for developing cancers because these genes that help to repair DNA don't work as well as they did when you were younger. However, there are people who have a mutation in their BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene that have a predisposition for developing, in this case, breast cancer. These are breast cancer genes. And so you can have yourself tested to see if you have the mutated version of BRCA1 or BRCA2. Typically, if you have this, you have a familial history of breast cancer. Breast cancer runs in your family, and people die of breast cancer, especially at young ages in your family. If that's the case, you should be tested for the BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations because that puts you at higher risk for developing breast cancer, and you should be watched more closely, have more frequent mammograms and more frequent exams. And in some cases, there have been a lot of people who have this mutation, who have a really strong family history of breast cancer, choose to undergo a radical surgery called a preventative mastectomy, where they actually have their breasts removed before they become cancerous to prevent themselves from developing a lethal form of cancer. Because oftentimes the type of cancer that's associated with this is very, very aggressive and hard to treat. And so I know there's been some celebrities in the news in the past few years, some very, very famous celebrities who have undergone such treatments. And, it makes the news because it's kind of a big deal, but it's also, I think in a way, they're doing something that's good for their body. So it's a personal decision, absolutely. So you can't inherit the breast cancer, but you can inherit a gene that makes you more at risk for developing breast cancer. And that was the example that was given here in the lesson. So how do you find out about this stuff? Well, there's something called genotyping. So basically, even though we have 99.9% the same um, genome as everybody else, there's enough variance that you can detect using this type of genotyping. They actually take a swab from the inside of your cheek and they test it, and they're able to see this. Because even within one family, there's a lot of variation. They bring up two siblings here, and each of these siblings has the same parents, and yet they have different genomes. And they do this because you don't necessarily inherit the same stuff from your mom and dad as your sisters or brothers do. Because you have, in this case, if mom and dad were both heterozygous, big P, little p, you have a 1 or a 2 in 4 chance, I should say a 1 in 4 chance of inheriting the little p alleles, a 2 in 4 chance of the big P, little p allele, and a 1 in 4 chance of the big P. So you may not inherit the same thing as your parents, right? So that's what they're kind of saying in this last part here, that even though your brothers and sisters are related to you, they don't necessarily have the same genes that you do. All right, so that is it for Unit 8, Lesson 6. Genetic variation can be inherited. Yes, we know already, right? If you have any questions on it, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you guys in my next video.